So welcome to SAEM Wavemakers webinar, The Secret Sauce Behind Repeated SAMI Success. I'm your co-host Laura O from Emory University. I'm here with my co-host Yo-Yo Duemu from Stanford. So to give you a little background on the SAMIs, so the SAMIs are our annual research awards created to celebrate ultrasound research excellence in categories such as Best RCT or Best Broad-Scale Innovation. This year, we're in our 10th year anniversary.
And so this is our first time we've featured SAMIs on a webinar, and we've assembled 5 panelists who are our repeat SAMI favorites and winners and consistently produce high-quality award-winning research year after year. So we want to have them come and talk about what makes them successful and lessons that maybe can be applied to other researchers in other departments. So I'll have them briefly introduce themselves. First, we have Frances Russell from Indiana University.
Hi, happy to be here. I always enjoy talking about research. So, I've been doing research in ultrasound for a little over a decade, and my research interests include using ultrasound to diagnose acute heart failure and guide early treatment, as well as medical education and curriculum development across the spectrum from UME to CME.
Thank you. And next we have Christiana Balescu from Yale.
Hello. So I'm an assistant professor of emergency medicine at Yale. My academic interests are point of care ultrasound and obviously research specifically in point of care ultrasound. I did my emergency medicine residency and fellowship at Yale as well. I'm mostly interested in applications of machine learning to point of care ultrasound for cardiac lung ultrasound, but sort of expanding into musculoskeletal and ultrasound guided regional anesthesia as well. And I'm looking forward to talking about research.
Thank you. And we have Megan Herbst from UConn.
Everybody, yep, I'm from UConn. I've been at UConn ever since fellowship. I graduated ultrasound fellowship back in 2011. I feel old, and I actually don't really consider myself primarily a researcher. I definitely consider myself more like a physician educator, and I think research kind of comes along with that. And my research, I guess, niche is more, it spans many applications, but I like looking at things that can be easily incorporated into daily practice as well as medical education. And I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks. Next, we have Matt Vicente from Denver.
Yeah, my name is Matt Resnicky. I'm the system-wide ultrasound director for the Denver Hospital System and fellowship director here. I've been in this space for at least 7 years, at least first fellowship, and I've been here that entire time. I like change at Kings County Refinements. Most of my work and energy was towards tech innovation, augmenting ultrasound performance. So that is generally almost always talking about AI research and development, how it can augment education, image acquisition, and diagnostics. That was at least what one of my SAMIs were for. Although I've also done some work in regional anesthesia as well.
Great. And last but not least, we have Mike Gottlieb from Rush.
Hi all, Michael Gottlieb. I'm Professor of EM, Vice Chair of Research and Director of Ultrasound at Rush. I am a bit more of a ultrasound polymethodologist, if you will. I enjoy being a lifelong learner, trying to try out new ways of studying things. And I think that's one of the fun parts about this. You get to explore a question from multiple different angles, everything from the systematic review through the randomized trial and implementation work, all the way through qualitative. How do we do things and how do we understand this process? And one of the things I've really enjoyed throughout this process is just building out teams and building out capacity in others. And so I'm thrilled to be a part of this panel and hopefully share some pearls, pitfalls, and allow you all to be more efficient and effective with your research going forward. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all. I'm going to hand it back over to Laura to start talking about some of the hot topic questions that we've prepared for the panel. But for everybody's attendance, please feel free to drop questions in the chat and we'll make sure that those get posed as well.
Thanks, Yo-Yo. So we'd like to begin by taking the approach of Simon Sinek, who wrote the leadership book, starting with why. So why do you do it? What do you love most about research?
Well, I got really into research actually during my fellowship year where it was just really strongly emphasized. And so I really saw the value in doing research. I think one of the great things about research is you can impact care on a global level. And so whether it's finding a new way to implement ultrasound or through curricular design, it's something that can impact patients and learners, not just in your local kind of ecosystem. but globally. And so I find that to be really rewarding.
I'll go next. So I'm actually also a convert to research. When I initially entered fellowship and kind of throughout my fellowship, I wanted to do more of teaching ultrasound in global health settings and setting up point of care ultrasound programs. But I actually found that I really enjoyed the structure and the discipline of scientific writing and sort of the thinking about an idea from multiple angles. I think research gives me a way to keep on learning and collaborate with a lot of thoughtful people. And so that's part of what I find rewarding about it. But I did not come into this thinking I would be a researcher.
Yeah, I also, I guess, started really, maybe I should say, enjoying research and fellowship. I feel like in med school and residency, I was doing research because I had to do it. And I was given a project that I wasn't super passionate about. And after fellowship, once I kind of convinced myself, or maybe during fellowship, I could do research. I think what's kept me pushing on and doing more research is we all, especially in ultrasound, I feel like we all work super, super hard. And there's something about kind of publishing a project that you've done, working really hard at it, publishing it, and then it's like there, and you leave that for people beyond you and people beyond your institution. And it was done and recorded. And I think too, the more we do, the more things change. And the more I realize a lot of what we do is replaceable and can be done by other people. But research is, it's nothing can really change it. It's there and people can use it moving forward to build knowledge.
Yeah, I agree. I think my answer is very in line with everyone else's and Francis in particular. It feels like we change medicine with our good research. And I feel like we are impacting the world ideally if the research is in fact applicable. And just like everyone, I didn't think I'd be doing this much research, but my natural evolution kind of came this way. So I was doing mostly free open access medical education, and then that turned into tech innovation. Tech innovation turned to things that were worthy of research. And I found myself here.
I think it's a good question because, as Simon Sinek said, start with why, but, I look at the Marie Kondo, we're really busy. And does this bring me joy? I have only so many hours in a day. Is this thing that's taking up a set amount of my week bringing me joy? Am I enjoying this? Because if you're not enjoying it, we're just doing it for the sake of doing it. I think we're doing disservice to ourselves, to our teams, and we're modeling the wrong model. And so, in addition to, I agree with everything that's been said. I'll say that the other area of impact that I find really valuable is the teams, the people who develop a passion for research, the people who learn new skills, who now take that on leadership as leading projects. And eventually, like with a kid when you're pushing a bicycle and then they are off on their own, that you're not needed anymore. I think that's a huge impact. And I think we have people walk away from this saying, oh, this is really cool. I want to do at least a little bit of research. That's a huge impact. And that's meaningful to me more probably than most of the other stuff I do. So I think that just understanding, if you enjoy doing this, I enjoy it. I enjoy this as a part of my career, even though it's only a portion of it, because I feel like the impact is there at multiple levels.
Yeah, and I would kind of say, building on that, if you are in an academic career, it is expected that you're going to have some sort of scholarly productivity, and whether you're a researcher applying for grants or whether you are just essentially publishing on things that are interesting to you. But I do think it's something that's expected in academic careers, especially if you want to go through promotion and tenure. And so finding something you enjoy, so kind of piggybacking off of what Mike said. So maybe you are not identifying as a researcher, like Megan, for example, who's the closeted researcher. I think finding something that you enjoy, whether it's a topic you enjoy or the methods you enjoy or writing or presenting, whatever it is, and kind of building off of that as a starting point, because there is a lot of frustration with doing research. It's not all like rainbows and sunshine. And so having that, the why I'm doing it and finding something that you enjoy will get you back out there and doing it, even on days that you're just like, oh, I'm so burnt out, I mentally can't do this, but then finding some element that will kind of motivate you to keep going.
Thank you, Francis. Sounds like a lot of themes there about making something that is part of the job rewarding, both personally and professionally. So want to pose our next question, which is kind of getting into the secret sauce. So, as Laura and I know, leading SAMEs for the last couple of years, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of publications that our members put out, and it increases year after year. But there are always some folks whose publications seem like they rise to the top because of impact, the methodology, a lot of different factors. So, wanted to ask the group, what do you think has been the biggest common denominator in what makes your work successful and stand out? Is it something related to methodology, asking the right question? What do you think has been the factors that have made your research projects really stand out above the crowd?
I was reflecting on this a bit since we first planned this talk and looking at some of the ones that have been nominated and we were fortunate, the ones that were fortunate enough to be selected for. And I noticed a couple of common themes. One of which is research efficiency. So we've developed teams that are really efficient at building systematic reviews, and we've been selected for a number of those. And so when you learn something, whether it's a technique, a methodology, an area of interest, is leveraging that for the next study. And so if you have an interest, like I do also in airway research, the first paper I did on that was, I don't know, 8 months of work and an inordinate amount of effort of trying to understand it. The 20th paper I did on that was 3 days of work. And that's because it built efficiencies over time. And so leveraging, like if you learn something, use that to say, okay, what's my next project? What's my next project? And that same thing applies to methodological roles. So if you get really good at a given methodology, qualitative, mixed methods, surveys, trials, systematic reviews, then people will come to you and be like, hey, how do I do this methods? And you can combine forces. And the other one is collaboration. Like most of the awards, we went across multiple different teams. There's very few overlap across teams. And that speaks to the amazing opportunity we have in our community of really brilliant people who help to expand their capacity to know things. And so, a number of these, I was not the originator of them. I was working with other people who had really great insights who helped me to learn something new I didn't get to learn. And we get to learn, and I bring my value, they bring their value, and we all learn together. We all walk away smarter and with a better project than any of us in isolation. And so those would be my two things I thought were most valuable is efficiency and leveraging your collaborations.
I do want to throw out there some of the SAMEs aren't a perfect way of evaluating research. So while we've all won awards, there are obviously really great projects out there that don't necessarily win awards. I think what has worked for me is just being an expert in one area. So my career trajectory at this point in my career, and that can change over time, is I'm really interested in how pre-hospital ultrasound can impact care for patients. And so moving beyond can we make this diagnosis, but why does it matter? Does it actually change what happens for the patient? Does it change behavior of the clinician? And so that kind of gets into more novel applications of ultrasound beyond can we make this diagnosis? And so I think if you are interested in doing research or already doing research, really becoming the expert in that area and kind of builds on what Mike has described, where when you're first getting into something, you have to do all this research, figure out what's been published on it, what are the limitations, and then that can help you kind of decide what your project is, gathering some data on that. So my awards are like a systematic review meta-analysis just on what is going on currently? What is the current kind of use for ultrasound? Who's doing it? And can they do a good job making a diagnosis as a non-physician? Then the next one was so now we've trained them in ultrasound. How is that impacting care? And so those are using the same team, same group of people, but different ways of evaluating things, and then just further building off of that. And so I think it's a different approach, but something that I think works well for impactful research that can actually change care.
And I wanted to dovetail off something Mike said. And this is both the secret sauce and also one of my main drivers of imposter syndrome, in that pretty much everything we've done has been truly interdisciplinary, many authors contributing in very meaningful ways. And pretty much every single thing I published, I can point to what that interdisciplinary relationship was. The Vexus work, we had cardiologists, ICU docs, right? They were actually doing the research with us. Some of the AI work, we actually work with a team of PhDs in the bioastronautics department in Boulder. They are engineers and they have an incredibly different approach to everything. It's both the hardest part of it because they want to kill us often because we're EM docs and we're a little bit looser than engineers, but also the best because the research productivity and the actual outcome and the methods are so much better as it is. And I think I honestly take that approach to most things I do, most projects where I work with someone with completely different mindset for me to solve similar problems. The bioastronauts in particular, right? They're looking at how we will diagnose things in space, and ultrasound is going to that way. And they spend a ton of time and energy like thinking about that. And I had never even thought about that before, right? So I'd say lean into people who are in some completely different backgrounds to get this stuff.
So, Mike, I love your comment about research efficiency, and Matt, love your comment about interdisciplinary collaboration. So, another thing that seems to separate these highly productive groups in research is the infrastructure, the research infrastructure. So, tell me a little bit more about what your research ecosystem looks like.
So the building I work in is part of the medical school, and I work kind of in a sea of a lot of learners. We have close to 500 medical students, and once a week I go to the primary site of our residency and I work closely with our residents and just listening to Francis and Matt about idea generation. I think there's a lot of idea generation in just teaching and listening and answering questions, and things come up and then they come up again, and we might take a look at the literature to better answer the question, and there's not much out there, and then time goes by, look again, and then ultimately we see it enough times that we want to actually do the research if there's a motivated person. So I guess I'll start with the people. The people I collaborate with are largely students, residents, fellows, and my colleagues in emergency medicine. Unlike Matt, there's little collaboration, although I have involved urology, surgery, cardiology. But so in terms of choosing the people I work with, I know the learners pretty well. Obviously, my colleagues and I know each other, and kind of making a good fit in terms of students working on a topic if they're really passionate about it. Every early second year of medical school, the students have to do a research project. And so they might approach me and they know me really well. So if they've approached me, they're ready to work. Usually that's kind of the impression that they get, is they're going to work hard if they do research with me. And then I also know that student pretty well. So that's kind of what starts off a project. And these recurrent themes that come up in teaching, I kind of keep a list. And so we choose a project based on what that student's interest is. And then I'm a huge fan of near-peer collaboration. So I will try to match a resident who's interested in doing ultrasound research, usually a first-year resident. And I typically approach the resident because I don't know if it's true of all programs, so most residents will put off research until later in their residency. And I find if they don't start in first year, they are not going to finish it by the time they graduate. So knowing the student and knowing our residents, the student approaches me, I approach the resident that I think would be a good person to work with the student, talk about the project. Occasionally they'll say, no, I'm not interested, or no, there's a lot going on right now, maybe in the future. And we'll find a resident who works really well. And I'll say to you, sometimes it's a fellow and sometimes it's a student resident fellow. So that's like the team. I built an ultrasound workflow with an Epic, and that is really great for retrospective research, which is kind of lower level research, but I just get the joy in doing the research, and maybe I'll grow and do some of the huge research that the other people in the panel are doing. And so having a workflow or documentation, whether it's third-party software like QPath or what we've done, everything is within Epic, and it allows us to work from a database and pull from ultrasound studies really easily. Stats, I do a lot of my own stats. Fairly recently, we hired a PhD who is our now research director. We did not have one as of 2 years ago. And so with her, I've actually been able to, she works on stats that are much more complicated. So I used to do all my own stats, but they were very simple. And now having her, she's made more possible. And having friends within the IRB is very helpful. Most of my research is unfunded. In fact, almost all of my research is unfunded. We don't have a grant writer, but if I do want to apply for funding, I write my own grants and work alongside this research director, which I might start doing more of. She's been a motivator. Sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot. And our ED is small. I think that's the last thing I'll say. Our ED is about 60,000 people, but we have all specialties. They're not deep specialties, but we have dermatology, ophthalmology, cardiothoracic surgery. So we don't ship too many patients out. So our ED is small, which I think is helpful getting complete data in a smaller system.
I love that. I think you do a great job of having limited resources, but being able to publish impactful research, even if it's retrospective. And so I think that's great. I think I have a lot of students, so I get protected time from the school just to do ultrasound research with students. So we have an ultrasound student interest group, and then the students have a president of this group and then a research officer of this group. And so I'm in contact with the research officer. So I have never ending students that want to do research. The problem is if it's not a project they are personally passionate about, and I'm just trying to connect them with a project, trying to keep them motivated is very challenging. Even if I have a resident or a fellow, like, how do you keep them motivated on the project and the project moving along? Are you actively involved in all of these projects in your free time?
Yes. So I'm envious. I have no protected time to do research, but I do have protected time to do education. So maybe that's part of how I think of myself as an educator, but I am very involved. I feel like if during each phase, if it's a data collection phase, there are very strict deadlines that the student sets. Kind of, we start at the beginning. We got to move this forward. Are you okay with this pace? Yes, I'm okay with that. Okay. Then we're going to set deadlines. You pick a deadline in the next, 2 to 4 weeks, and how much data you're going to pull in that time. And this might be after they collect some patient information so they get a sense. And they picked the deadline. So they're more likely to meet the deadline, but I'll touch base like when that day comes. If I haven't heard from them, hey, just checking in. Occasionally they'll say, oh, I didn't anticipate how busy I was going to be, and we'll move it a week later or something like that. But I find maybe, I don't know how many learners are on this right now, but I'm probably very annoying to some of them in terms of I won't just let it go or forget. It's in my calendar, so I touch base with them. And oftentimes they start, okay, she's going to stay on top of this, so I'm going to stay on top of this. And I will say too, sometimes they're just on it and I don't have to really get involved, check in much at all. And then draft writing. Okay, you need a draft by this date. And in the draft writing phase, that tends to be where things sit the most. And the longer it sits, the more time it takes away from everybody, because every time you read a draft and then, send it off or give feedback, if it's 2 months later when the draft comes back, you have to reorient yourself and re-get into it. And so I find it's kind of like the last stretch where let's just write it out. I don't care if it's perfect, just write out, what you can, put it on paper. We can go through it. So very fast deadlines. And I say at the beginning to the learners, the faster we get through everything, the less you'll hear from me. And you might think that's not a problem right now, but let me tell you, in a year, you will want to be done. I don't know how that sounds to anybody or how this is coming off, but deadlines are kind of the crux of everything. And they also have an obligation to the medical school to complete this research. And there are so many students who try their projects with other people who don't do much research in the med school. They get dropped or lost, and then they're stuck and they can't graduate. And so I think those stories trickle down. Also, our residents can't graduate if they don't have a research project. So they do have obligations that are, much bigger than me. And anyway, I'm very involved and lots of deadlines and communication.
Thank you for that, Megan. Matt, did you want to also answer that, or we can also move on? It depends.
Yeah, I'll just briefly say we have monthly meetings where everyone involved in our research apparatus has to come and give updates. And I think there's just enough accountability and borderline embarrassment if they don't have updates. But things will come from that already. I find that to be highly effective, and that's probably the main project management thing that we do, and it works. And there's a project management sheet. You don't just do a Gantt chart, but that's all.
And so many departments want to build a stronger ultrasound research program, but what is an investment you would make to strengthen your ultrasound research program?
So we've recently, I think, done a little bit of this, mostly because we've had a lot of junior faculty join our group. It used to be, Chris, Rachel, me, plus minus a couple other people rotating, but now we have a few junior faculty. So we've really tried to invest in sort of a collaborative research process where we sort of are all peripherally, at least at the minimum, peripherally involved in the research, if not sort of all working together. It's still not 100% there, but I do think it has made a difference in a lot of the junior faculty sort of building more, thinking of research more, starting projects more, and sort of keeping them accountable as well. I do think that strong programs also recognize that everyone has a role, right? Someone may be really good at thinking of really interesting clinical questions or research questions, but then may not necessarily know sort of how to go from that to a good study design that is also feasible. So maybe that's someone else's strength. Maybe someone sort of knows some statistics that are really helpful. Maybe someone's a really good data manager and really good with deadlines, or, sort of is a good motivator or a cheerleader. So I think that's part of it, is sort of figuring out who your collaborators are, like within the department, sort of fostering everyone's pluses, sort of what they bring to the table and what they're best at, while also allowing them a chance to grow in the other directions. Having regular research meetings, I think, have also been really helpful for us. Sort of gives you a time to sit down, brainstorm, refine ideas, figure out your barriers early, and kind of gives a sense of accountability too, if you haven't, spoken in a while, or if you've been asked 3 times, sort of where you are with your project, and it's been crickets 3 times, maybe the 4th time, you're like, I'm actually going to have to put a little bit of time to move this forward. And then we don't have this, but partly because there's some statistical knowledge sort of within our group. But I do think that having either a statistician or someone that's close to your group or to your research program that can help answer some stats questions and help you think through some methodology, and that can be a mentor too, that is also helpful. I think especially whenever I've tackled larger projects or projects that are more complex in terms of their methods, having someone with a lot of statistical expertise has really helped kind of make it into a better project, for sure.
That was an awesome summary. And I'll just add maybe one last kind of roll on top because I completely agree with everything Christiana said. I think sometimes it just helps to recognize that not everyone needs to know everything, and just normalizing that if you get everyone kind of aligned that, okay, this is a project and each person brings different areas of expertise, it's not so overwhelming to say, oh, I can't lead this project, because often it's a sense of looking for the attending, right? Like the person you're looking around, like, oh, that person does more research, so they should be able to do it. But realizing everyone brings something to the table, figuring out what their special ability, their superpower is, what their skill set is, and then leveraging the people in your group who can help to complement that. And if you can be kind of like a research matchmaker where you can get the different pieces of the puzzle together, then everyone feels like they're actually a part of the project. And I think if we step away from the mindset of, oh, either I can't do this or I need to know how to do everything before I can start this project, we start to look at this as a singular person-centric model as opposed to research as a team science. They function as teams, and teams each have complementary abilities. So how do we get everyone to add their special skill to the table, and then you make something pretty special?
Thank you. I'm definitely going to steal some of those ideas. I love the idea of having a student group that is part of a research infrastructure and getting some buy-down for that. So we're going to jump forward a little bit to make sure that we can get people out on time. I think this one is really helpful for everyone because sometimes we see successful researchers and then it's easy to wonder, do they ever have any projects that don't work out? Do they ever have failures that everybody else is very familiar with individually? So I wanted to see, can you share a project that was not successful and what you learned from it? And how did that experience change the way that you approach research in the future?
Okay. I feel like a queen of failures. So I'm going to try to keep these stories really quick. So first of all, when I was a fellow, I was really lucky, had great teaching, great role models. It was at Yale. They have a great research infrastructure. I did 2 projects and they were both accepted there was no journal jump thing that, submitted. There were revisions, but my fellowship director was he kind of worked a lot with me on the revisions and really took care of the revisions. I was actually not too much part of the revisions. So then I was off on my own and I was doing some projects and I would submit papers for publication, and I immediately thought it was a failure if I got rejections and kind of just moved on, just thinking, oh yeah, it wasn't worth anything anyway. Or even revisions. There was at least one paper that I think the revisions were just really harsh. And when I read through them, I just thought, oh, they didn't like it. So it took a little while before I realized, wow, revisions are a good thing, and embraced those. And the two quick stories, one was actually a SAME winner. It was the occult wall motion abnormality among patients who have chest pain, but there was no EKG change that was consistent with ischemia, or non-diagnostic EKG, we called it. This started out as a case series. Over time, I noticed this is at Hartford Hospital, there'd be a wall motion abnormality. We noticed it. Hour later, troponin would come back. It'd be elevated. Later on, we'd look back at the patient chart, and the patient went to the cath lab eventually and on the cath report, had stenosis of greater than 95% at the point of the wall motion abnormality. So this happened a lot, seemingly. And then I thought, oh, we'll do a case series. I found a resident at the time, not a student at the time. I was just at the residency. We submitted it. Case series was rejected. Then we wanted to study it retrospectively. That was rejected. And I remember going to our residency research director and kind of I'd put a lot of time into it, met with him. I was very frustrated and I wanted a non-biased viewpoint, and he was kind of taking notes. And I remember telling him, I know this is a real thing. A lot of the feedback I was getting when I was submitting was, yeah, you can't make the connection. Why are you eliminating STEMIs? Why are you eliminating sick people? This seems biased because the people you're ultrasounding are, you have a higher suspicion that there's going to be a problem. Anyway, he was writing down what I was telling him, and he said, go back, reframe the paper with this in your intro and discussion, expand your retrospective timeline. And we put a lot more work into it and submitted it again to AEUS because I think we originally submitted the series. So this was kind of a happy ending thing where they then liked it. We got revisions, we worked on it, and we got it accepted. I'm probably most proud of that paper because it was a saga. I kind of summarized it, probably not very articulately, but it was a lot of work. The other story we still have not gotten published, and this is pretty typical of how we generate ideas. So I do video review every week with residents and students, and there was a apical four-chamber view that we were looking at. We didn't know much about the patients. We're just looking at the images, and there's a McConnell sign. So I've got a junior resident and a senior resident, and I ask the junior resident, what's your interpretation of this? And the junior resident says, I see a McConnell sign. I said, great, what's your differential? He said, pulmonary embolism. I said, great, anything else on your differential? And he said, I can't think of anything else. And I went to the senior resident, who's now faculty at Yale, actually, and I said, do you have any other differentials? He said, no, I just think of pulmonary embolism when I see a McConnell sign. So I said out loud something I had been observing, where when the RV, if there's a McConnell sign and the RV is smaller than the LV, I've seen RV infarcts do that, like the RCA occlusion causing a McConnell sign. It's not very common, and not all RCA occlusions cause this, but if you have a right-sided MI, it can give you a McConnell sign. So the senior resident was like, oh, wow, why don't you look at this? And I thought that was great. And again, this is very typical of idea generation. I had seen it a lot. I brought it up in a teaching point, and then this resident who actually was very interested in research said, let's look at this. Anyway, there's not many RV infarcts that give you McConnell sign, and there's a lot of pulmonary emboli that give you McConnell sign. So we wrote it up. We had a physiological mechanism for why the RV would not get super big in the setting of a myocardial infarction, and why it would in the setting of a PE. And we thought it was really well written, and we submitted it probably to 10 journals. We even looked at all the literature. Every documentation of McConnell sign in the setting of a PE, the RV would be as big or bigger than the LV, but nobody really thought it was a thing. And the more I thought about it, I guess I got less passionate about it, other than there was just a lot of work invested. And so how do I make this positive? I guess you can, there's a learning process, and I learned a lot even though this has never been published, it's still in a file somewhere. And maybe sometime in the future, we'll do a really big prospective study, even that's probably hard with an RV infarct, or a larger retrospective study and look at it again. But sometimes there's just not the same interest there, or sometimes there's not really the clinical utility that you think, and that's okay.
Thank you, Megan. So we're nearing the end of our webinar, so I want to give the other panelists some time to just have if you have a closing pearl, one piece of advice for someone hoping to build a successful ultrasound research career. Christiana, do you have something that you'd like to share?
Yeah, for sure. I think my biggest personal growth in this process has been to learn. I guess I've always been somewhat of a resilient person, but sort of staying calm, continue sort of pushing along, and don't sort of measure your career or your worth by every individual success or rejection. Because I do think it's very easy to sort of get psyched out by all of the research. Takes a while, and there's always things that come up. So just as long as you're working on it, that's really the best that you can do, and try to enjoy the things that are enjoyable.
Matt, do you have anything you'd like to share?
One thing I wanted to say that we didn't bring up is schedule time for deep work. So set aside 2 or 3 hours. Unfortunately, I have a 2-year-old and this needs I have to do that extremely early in the morning before he wakes up. But from 6 to 8 a.m., I do all my writing on days that I need to write. And I think we all have to protect our time in order to get that.
Perfect. And then, Francis, do you have a closing thought?
Yeah, a few things. So I think Mike kind of touched on this, and we've all kind of touched on this, but building the right team is so important. It took me years to build the team that I had, and people come and go, but you can still collaborate even if they're at a different institution. And so that's really key. I have a colleague of mine who did a master's in biostats. So when I have a project, I go to him and I'm like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. How do I make this better? How do I write my aims? I think using AI has been super helpful for getting feedback on writing a specific aims page, or helping me refine my aims, or just helping me refine a project and be like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. What outcomes should I be looking into? I think one of my other passions is mentoring and research. So I mentor from student to faculty, and not just at my own institution. So if anyone is like, hey, I'm thinking about getting into research, feel free to email me. Happy to connect you with other people who maybe have similar interests. I will put in a plug for the SAEM grant writing group. So Christiana's going to be taking over this as part of her research officer duties. But we have a grant writing group that goes from like January through essentially August, when the SAMF Foundation grants are due. But it can be used for any grant really that you're trying to write. It's just a great way to talk about your project with people who aren't directly connected with it, get feedback on it. And it's a way to improve at the beginning so that your project is better as you work through it. There's nothing worse than kind of what Megan described, like you're doing a project, you spend all this time, and then you're like, wait, I should have thought about X, Y, and Z a long time ago. And so I think that can be super helpful as well, just to think about the project before you start on it.
Megan, do you have any final words of wisdom?
No, just I agree with everything that everybody said. Really, I think for me, it's just enjoy what you're studying and the people you're working with.
Well, thank you all so much for your time. We loved listening to all of you share your ultrasound research expertise. What a fantastic panel. Thank you so much for your contributions to ultrasound research in the SAMEs.